Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be discussing the beautiful Lena Horne. Lena Mary Calhoun Horne was born on June 30th, 1917, to parents Edwin or Teddy and Edna Horne in Brooklyn, New York. Lena's parents got divorced when she was only 3 years old, and according to her, they both proceeded living their own separate lives and had very little time for little Lena. We sure do hear that a lot, don't we? Edna was an actress with a black theater troupe, and she was on the road for performances frequently. Sometimes she would bring Lena along, but most often not. And Father Teddy had moved to Pittsburgh. Lena didn't see him as often as she would have liked to as a child, but she would always adore her father. Lena spent most of her childhood passed around amongst various strangers, whoever her mother could find to care for her while she was traveling with her theater troupe. Lena spent time juggled around New York, Florida, and Georgia. With these constant relocations, Lena's schooling was very disrupted. Sometimes she didn't go to school at all. She wanted to, but the adults in her life were too focused on themselves to worry about her well-being. And then there was the abuse. Lena was abused both by her mother's friends who were supposed to be caring for her and by her mother herself. Lena did have at least a little stability in her early life, every now and then at least, in her grandparents who also resided in Brooklyn. It was a strict and serious home, but it was a consistent home at least. It gave her a small sense of belonging, which she never had anywhere else. Her grandmother was the daughter of a slave who went on to become a college graduate and a social activist. A truly remarkable woman and an amazing role model for a young black girl in the 1920s to have. Sadly, she died when Lena was 15 years old, and it was an emotionally crushing experience for her. My nomadic childhood taught me to hide my feelings, Lena later reflected. I became secretive. I became very suspicious of everyone. I became unable to be my real self. I was like two Lenas, the one I showed the world and the one inside of me. I want to take my podcaster hat off for a second and put on my early childhood brain development hat, because Lena's childhood is heartbreaking, isn't it? And sadly, it really wasn't too uncommon of a situation in those days. It wasn't uncommon for children to be passed around to anyone who had a place for them to sleep and a little extra food they could throw in their mouths every now and then. Children were a nuisance much of the time, and consideration to their positive emotional development was mostly non-existent. In Lena's case, it was commonplace for the mother to keep the child, so when her parents divorced, she of course stayed with Edna. But Edna was busy chasing her own dreams. Yes, she had to make money, but she definitely could have found a job that kept her home instead of traveling the country with a theater troupe. The other friends and family who took Lena in were likely doing their absolute bare minimum, simply keeping her alive. Thank goodness she had her grandparents for a portion of her childhood at least. The childhood years of life are crucial in so many ways in the formation of ourselves. Our personas, who we are literally being formed. Just as our bodies grow, so is our personality, our mindset, how we perceive life and relationships, our emotional capacity. I could go on and on. So how our childhoods are provided to us is absolutely critical in who we become as people. And it is up to the adults who are supposed to be responsible for the children to make sure that is supported the best way they are able. Unfortunately, as we all know, that is really difficult for many parents to do because of various factors. Socioeconomic circumstances, mental illness, etc. But unfortunately, some parents also simply just don't care to give their children the nurturing, love, and support they need. And when I say need, I mean need. It is a crucial part of their development. As you can tell, I am very passionate about my job. I'll just wrap this up by saying that the passing around that Lena Horne experienced as a child is not good for a child's emotional, mental, or cognitive development. Things that suffer as a result are the development of a sense of self, a sense of belonging, self-esteem, forming and maintaining relationships, cognitive and academic success, and of course, mental health. There are studies that link frequent childhood moves to adult depression and relationship struggles. And I believe these studies follow children who moved with their consistent families, not moved alone to other homes like Lena did. So you can see what Lena Horne had to overcome as a result of her inconsistent childhood. And the quote I shared about her feeling like there were two Lenas, this is why. Her mental health was definitely damaged as a result of her being passed around as a child. She never felt loved or wanted. Okay, done with my yapping about that. Back in New York in the early 1930s, the Great Depression was incredibly difficult for Lena's mother and new stepfather. Edna had remarried a Cuban man named Miguel Rodriguez. They both had a hard time finding work, so 16-year-old Lena set out to find work herself so she could help put food on the table. Her dreams were to become a teacher. Her mother's dreams were for her to become a performer. I cried when my mother pulled me out of school to work at the Cotton Club, which really was a form of indentured servitude, said Lena. The fact that the stage was designed to look like a plantation and the black servers were dressed like slave butlers backed this feeling up. Lena felt hurt, abandonment, discouragement, and a lot of anger at her mother for forcing her into this life. The atmosphere at the Cotton Club in Harlem was not a healthy one. Working conditions were very poor, and there was a lot of drama amongst the performers. They were all so young. Management tried to keep the chorus girls and dancers under the age of 21. Although there was a lot of negativity working at the Cotton Club, Lena still felt a sense of community that she'd never really had the privilege of feeling before. "All my life I've been looking for a family," she later said, and she felt that she found it there. Lena said she couldn't sing or dance at this point, but she was pretty, and that's what mattered most at the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club, like many other clubs in Harlem in the 1930s, showcased black performers to an all-white audience. But not too black, because white people didn't like that. Just the right shade of light-skinned black. It was hard, grueling work. The performers were responsible for 3 performances every night. One at 8:30, another at 11:30, and the final at 2 a.m. Doesn't that sound exhausting? I mean, their first performance of the night is not too far from my bedtime. Aside from the exhausting performance schedule, there were constant sexual advances from the white men in the audiences. And the young chorus girls, including Lena Horne, were encouraged by management to be, quote, friendly with the club patrons. And to top off the horrendous working conditions of the Cotton Club, the black talent wasn't even allowed to use the club's restroom. Teenage Lena Horne was now her family's breadwinner. At 16 years old, she was supporting her mother and stepfather on her $25 per week salary, which would be about $615 per week today. The Cotton Club showcased some really great musical talent, though, figures like Cab Calloway and Duke Ellington. And this introduced Lena Horne into the great world of music, a world she was soon going to become highly involved in. Lena joined up with Noble Sissle and his Society Orchestra and went on the road performing when she was 18 years old. She said touring as an all-black band in the Jim Crow South was absolute pure hell. But her mother insisted that she remain a performer, and she kept a really tight leash on Lena. It got so unbearable that Lena dreamed of escaping so she could follow her own dreams and live her own life. And that's exactly what she ended up doing. In January of 1937, 19-year-old Lena Horne ran away and married a man named Louis Jones. Lena described her husband Louis as an, quote, aspiring politician looking for a well-trained wife. I certainly do not fit that description. And Lena soon learned, neither did she. Lena actually met her husband through her father. Teddy now owned a small hotel in Pittsburgh with a gambling hall upstairs, and Louis was a regular of the establishment. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, highly respected, and educated. Lena's mother, Edna, was not thrilled about her daughter's decision to forfeit a life of performing on the road to get married. And although it was through Lena's father that she met Lewis Jones, he wasn't too thrilled either. Lena saw this transition into married life as finally having the home she always wanted so badly. The home she never had. But the marriage was never good. Lewis wanted a good little wife who stayed home and made sure everything was perfect at all times. A woman who obeyed his every demand. Lena didn't know the first thing about keeping a home. She didn't know how to cook, how to clean, or how to manage a home on a daily basis. It was a bit more than Lena had envisioned in her dreams of home and marriage. Lena was pregnant within the first few months of marriage, and on December 21st, 1937, she gave birth to her first child, a little girl they named Gail. But now she not only had to continue learning how to keep a perfect home and be a perfect wife for her demanding husband, but she had to figure out how to take care of a baby too, and raise her to also be perfect. Across the nation from Lena's home in Pittsburgh, Hollywood was growing and transforming at an astounding rate. And talk of the striking presence that Lena Horne had made performing had made its way out west. Not amongst the big five studios, not yet, but with the successful studios in the Black Hollywood community that were turning out race films in Old Hollywood. Black film company Million Dollar Productions was interested in Lena Horne for their upcoming movie, The Duke is Tops, in early 1938. When Lena's agent called her in Pittsburgh with this exciting news, she wasn't interested. Her show business days were over. She was retired at 19 years old, and her sole role in life was now wife and mother. But they persisted, and Lena Horne was finally convinced to fly out to LA to make the movie that was planned to have just a 10-day filming schedule. When Lena Horne arrived in Hollywood just a couple of months after having her baby, though, the guys at Million Dollar Productions were a little disappointed to see that she wasn't a tiny-waisted little woman. She carried a little extra weight, obviously, because she had just given birth to a human being. And it doesn't sound like they were too shy telling her how plump they saw her either. Well, it all worked out, and Lena Horne was in the film. And as described in my primary source, the book titled Lena Horne, Goddess Reclaimed by the great biographer Donald Bogle, she was clearly a star in the making. Lena returned to her life as a housewife in Pittsburgh, even more unhappy in her life as a dutiful Stepford wife now that she'd had a little taste of excitement and glamour in her life again. Her husband was not supportive of her appearing in The Duke is Tops, and he forbade her from attending the Pittsburgh premiere of the film. Pittsburgh was proud to have their own Lena Horne in a Hollywood film. Well, all of Pittsburgh except for Lewis Jones. Lena had her second child with Jones on February 7th, 1940, this time a little boy named Eddie. Even busier now with two little ones at home, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of wanting more. When asked to team up with a local pianist to perform at local parties, Lena jumped at the chance to get glammed up and get out of the house. And they weren't just any house parties, they were entertaining at elegant upper-class social events. This solidified it for Lena. She wasn't going to remain a housewife for the rest of her life. She wanted to entertain. So she devised a plan that she would return to New York to revitalize her showbiz career, and once established, she would return to Pittsburgh for her two young children. When Lena Horne stepped back onto the streets of New York in 1940, though, there was nothing there for her. She tried the Cotton Club first, nothing. She tried Noble Sissel, nope. Nobody seemed to want her. And then finally, someone needed her. Charlie Barnett and his band were in need of a lead vocalist. Charlie Barnett, a white man, and his all-white band. Lena Horne was hired, becoming one of the first Black performers to tour with an all-white band. Billie Holiday had done the same thing with Artie Shaw a couple of years earlier. Lena didn't stay with Barnett's band for long. She didn't feel comfortable traveling with an all-male band. She wanted to branch out on her own. But first, she needed to retrieve her children from her estranged husband. Only Lewis refused to allow her custody of little Eddie. He said she was free to take their almost 3-year-old daughter Gail, but he was keeping their little boy. Eddie was his, and the courts agreed. This shattered Lena, and she considered it the biggest heartbreak of her life. Their divorce was finalized a few years down the road in 1944. Now wanting to make it as a solo vocalist, Lena Horne began performing at the famed Cafe Society in Greenwich Village. Lena still didn't consider herself a good singer, but she was being pushed really hard to sing the blues like Billie Holiday, who was also a Cafe Society regular. She was terrified to sing the blues because you needed to reach into your emotions to sing the blues, and she was afraid to do that. She had everything bottled up so deep inside, and she was scared to access that. So she went to Billie Holiday and asked her what she should do. Billie Holiday told her, "You got 2 babies, you gotta pay your rent. Sing a song." So she did. During her time at Cafe Society, Lena Horne made a lot of very influential friends and acquaintances, including Paul Robeson. If you haven't listened to my episode on him, I highly encourage you to give it a listen. He had a remarkable yet heartbreaking life. It was Robeson who set the foundation for Lena Horne's future activism and political work. So anyways, it was there at Cafe Society where Lena made connections that brought her into the world of politics, civil rights advocacy, culture, and African American history. Cafe Society was a hub of art, politics, philosophy, and culture. Not only were the patrons very intellectually minded and influential, but its stage held some of the best performers of the time. Lena's time at Cafe Society was a very important period of her life and career, and she experienced a lot of professional growth in her time there. From Cafe Society, Lena Horne was invited to perform a regular engagement with Duke Ellington and Ethel Waters at the famed Cafe Trocadero nightclub on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. 24-year-old Lena and her 3-year-old daughter Gail arrived in LA on a hot summer day in 1941, ready to embark on an exciting new chapter in their lives. But Lena realized right away that Los Angeles was a very segregated city. Life in LA was much different than life in New York City. Luckily, Lena Horne met her soulmate in those first days of adjustment to her new city, a man named Billy Strayhorn. Lena's ex-lover, Duke Ellington, enlisted Strayhorn to accompany Lena to his show one night, and the two souls were an instant match. In a friendly way, Billy Strayhorn was gay. Lena recalled of their initial meeting, quote, "For me, it's as if my other self came up and spoke to me. We were that much in sync," end quote. The two were instantly inseparable, and Strayhorn was solely responsible for making Lena Horne feel somewhat safe and welcome in Los Angeles. Hopping right on the stage at the Trocadero wasn't going to be that easy, though. The club was in the middle of major renovations, and building materials were difficult to come by during wartime, so the construction was taking much longer than anticipated. So Lena Horne performed at the Little Troc, which was opened 6 blocks down Sunset Boulevard from the Troc. And Lena Horne was an instant sensation at the Little Troc. But she said it was definitely little. She was a billed performer with Katherine Dunham, and Lena said the stage was so small and so close to the tables of diners that Katherine's dresses would dip into patrons' soup as she danced. It was definitely an experience, not so much the experience Lena Horne was expecting in her new life out west. Lena did eventually make it onto the big stage of the glamorous Trocadero, and word spread quickly within LA circles of her beauty and remarkable performances. Soon, all of the hot celebrities were strolling through the door to see Lena sing. Marlene Dietrich, Lana Turner, John Barrymore, Greta Garbo. It was a pretty huge deal. MGM composer Roger Edens also came to see Lena Horne a few times at the Troc, and he convinced MGM producer Arthur Freed to meet her in January of 1942. Freed wasn't much interested in signing a black woman with MGM, but he relented and he promised 15 minutes of his time to see her at Edens' urging. Arthur Freed made the mistake of letting racism get in the way of sound judgment, so it's a good thing Roger Edens was so persistent on getting Lena Horne into his office, because Freed immediately saw the uniqueness in her. He liked her so much, in fact, that he marched her right up to MGM head Louis B. Mayer's office so he could see her and hear her himself. And Louis B. Mayer also liked her. What Roger Edens was hoping was a one-picture deal for Lena Horne became much better. She was presented with a long-term contract with MGM, the greatest movie studio in the world. This was all very overwhelming for Lena. She had relocated to LA to sing at the Trocadero nightclub, and all of a sudden, MGM wanted to sign her to a 7-year movie contract. MGM, Louis B. Mayer's magical land of make-believe. His magical white land of make-believe. Lena needed advice, so she called her father. Teddy headed west immediately, and he accompanied his daughter to her next meeting with Louis B. Mayer. Teddy was confident and stern with Mayer. He did not want his daughter falling into the stereotypical servant roles that all black actors were cast into. I don't think Mr. Mayer had ever been approached by a black man like that, Lena said. Louis B. Mayer assured Teddy Horne that his daughter would be treated with respect and dignity. Meanwhile, the NAACP had been working to break the color line in Hollywood, and they thought Lena Horne would be the perfect person to lead that fight. They wanted to fight for black actors and actresses to be cast in movie roles with substance, to have important starring or supporting roles. Not the menial roles black actors and actresses were currently being cast in. The help. So they enlisted Lena Horne to be their Hollywood representative for the cause. And this contract with MGM was just what they needed. It was then that in January of 1942, Lena Horne became the first black person to ever be signed to a long-term studio contract with a major film studio. And she was signed to the best studio in Hollywood. In the world. Lena soon learned what it meant to be signed under contract with a major Hollywood studio, though. The pay was great and would only get greater, but the studio more or less owned her now. There would be strict expectations and strict rules to follow. Rules such as her body weight never to exceed 122 pounds. 5'5" and 122 pounds was as heavy as she was allowed to get. Then came the issue of her hair and makeup. Hair and makeup tests were customary at the start of studio contracts, but it was a whole new situation now with Lena Horne in the hair and makeup chairs. Nobody knew what to do with her skin color or her hair texture. They'd only ever worked with white skin and the hair of white women. They finally figured out a foundation formula for her skin tone, but nobody could figure out her hair. So, the first ever black hairstylist was hired at MGM to style Lena Horne's hair, a woman named Tiny Kyle. Frustrated with so many failed attempts by white stylists, Lena told them they had to bring in a black hairstylist. She would know exactly what to do. Tiny Kyle would remain with Lena Horne for most of her career. Under Lena's MGM contract, she was still able to perform in nightclubs. So she continued to perform at the Trocadero and then moved over to the even hotter Macambo Club. Even bigger movie stars filled seats to see her there. Since her contract stipulated she was only going to appear in certain types of roles, as in she wouldn't be typed into a maid or mammy roles like all of the other black actresses in Hollywood, this created tension between her and the Hollywood black community. The NAACP was pushing for studios to stop casting black actors in only servant roles. But the black actors found themselves not being cast in any roles if the servant roles were eliminated. One prominent black actress who had Lena Horne's back was the great Hattie McDaniel. She invited Lena over to her home and she said to her, quote, "You are a very unhappy girl, and I can understand why. Your own people are mad with you, and the others don't even know what's happening. Let me tell you, I have worn 2 hats. I have a family I've taken care of very beautifully. I am a fine black mammy on screen, but I am Hattie McDaniel in my house. You've got 2 babies, and you've got to work. Just do what you have to do." End quote. Furthermore, MGM decided it wasn't quite ready to show the world how bold they were by signing a black actress to a long-term contract and showcasing her in actual leading roles. No, that's too crazy. So they decided she would be Latino. They tried to pass Lena Horne off as Latino because God forbid they would have a black leading lady. Well, this backfired greatly within the black acting community of Hollywood, because they saw this and thought that Lena herself was trying to pass as Latino, that she was ashamed to be black. And this infuriated her black peers in Hollywood. But it just wasn't true. Lena was proud to be black, and she was proud to be the first black actor signed to a 7-year studio contract. She was a trailblazer, but the lies told by MGM just alienated her from the people in Hollywood who should have been her allies and friends. Lena Horne's first film with MGM was Panama Hattie. She had a small part in the movie, but it was a beautiful and memorable part. Viewers took notice. If you aren't familiar with Lena Horne, please take a moment to look up a video of her singing Just One of Those Things in Panama Hattie. I'll link it in the show notes and also share it on Instagram and Facebook. Lena Horne has such a beautiful and captivating smile, and her eyes when she sings show so much fire and animation. She's just really entertaining and lovely to watch perform, and she is absolutely beautiful. It is assumed by many that Panama Hattie was a carefully chosen script for Lena Horne to make her MGM debut in. It was a perfect vehicle to present the exotic-looking, dark but not super dark-skinned beautiful woman in, because maybe, just maybe, viewers would actually buy that she was Latino. Shortly after filming Panama Hattie, Lena returned to New York for a benefit. She spent some time at both Cafe Society and the Cotton Club, reconnecting with her New York friends. And man, did she miss them. She missed New York so much. She did not like LA, not even a little. So she decided she was going to say screw it to the big Hollywood movie contract and move back home to New York. But one of those old friends she spent time with on her visit was Count Basie, and he talked her out of it. He reminded her that she had an obligation to black performers across the nation to break racial barriers and achieve success in film roles outside of the degrading servant roles. She may not have wanted to be the poster child for black actors, but she had been chosen to be, and now all eyes were on her. He said to her, quote, "You have to go back. There's no one out there yet like you. We want to be in the movies too. You have to go back because you've got to make it possible for others of us to go out there too." End quote. Count Basie convinced Lena to return to Hollywood and stick with her MGM contract. "He brought to life in me this kind of spark," Lena recounted. "It wasn't always happy, but it was that I must be representative of people. He made me realize that it didn't matter that I didn't like it and I wasn't happy, but I had been given the job, so I had to do it. And I better be good at it. It's a hard road to hold." End quote. Next up in Lena's obligations to MGM, the NAACP, and all black people around the U.S. was the 1943 film Cabin in the Sky, with veteran black performers Ethel Waters and Eddie Anderson. This movie had an all-black cast. Lena Horne had long admired Ethel Waters, but the feeling wasn't exactly mutual now that they were on the same stomping grounds at the same time in Hollywood. Accounts say that Ethel Waters was a bit jealous of her much younger but equally beautiful and talented Lena Horne getting so much buzz in her territory. So off-screen during filming of Cabin in the Sky, Ethel Waters created a bit of tension and unease for Lena Horne. And then one day, she exploded. She had an outburst on set so strong that it stunned everyone on set into silence. It's believed that watching the crew pay so much attention to making Lena Horne look perfect in her scenes brought out a rage in Ethel Waters that just blew up. A rage at the system that she fought through so much injustice in that was now treating this new young black woman like a queen. She was treated like dirt when she was Lena's age. She wasn't able to see that her own experiences of enduring ugliness had helped get them to a place where another young woman with dark skin could be treated so much better. That she herself was a part of the change. It was impossible for her to see that then. All she felt was rage. Vincent Minnelli was the director of Cabin in the Sky, and he'd also helped direct Panama Hattie. He and Lena had become friendly right away. They'd actually met back in New York a couple of years prior. I believe it was a romantic relationship. It was never really confirmed in anything I read. But Donald Bogle wrote in his book that they spent a lot of time together and would have dinner either privately in one of their homes, since a black woman couldn't sit in most restaurants with a white man. Or they would dine together at one of the very few nice restaurants that would allow it. They were very close for a while. Professionally, Lena Horne wasn't quite being portrayed as the great black leading lady she had been told she would be. MGM was having a pretty tough time showcasing her in leading lady roles. This would be a long process in Hollywood, a process I think they're still trying to get the hang of today. Lena kept returning to the cabaret scene. This was where she felt herself and where she knew she could artistically shine. A key figure at MGM had been really helping her grow musically. He was MGM music director Lenny Hayden. More on him in a bit. Once more established professionally in Los Angeles, Lena Horne decided to purchase her own home in a white neighborhood. And of course, those white neighbors did not like this, so they passed around a petition to sign in order to force Lena out of her own home. This is the same thing that happened to Hattie McDaniel, Ethel Waters, and Louise Beavers. Nat King Cole, too. I mentioned this in my Black History in Hollywood bonus episode too, but a few residents in Lena Horne's new neighborhood did not sign that petition. One of these people was Humphrey Bogart. In fact, he took it a step further and went door to door telling his fellow white neighbors they better be kind to Lena Horne or else. Although Lena Horne lived in a white neighborhood, she socialized often in Black Hollywood. MGM would push her to socialize in white social circles, but she was never fully accepted in those circles. Lena still wasn't content in Los Angeles, but it was the Black Hollywood clubs and parties that she felt the most comfortable in. In the social settings MGM pushed her into, she had a very precise image to uphold. In Black Hollywood, she could be herself. She felt culturally safe with them. Really, though, she yearned to be back in New York. Let's talk about Lena Horne's love life. I mentioned Vincent Minnelli. This was a little bit before he married Judy Garland. And then there was Orson Welles. Welles was entranced by Lena Horne when he saw her in Cabin in the Sky. He wanted her, both professionally in a film project and personally for himself. In a time when interracial romances were not accepted in society, Orson Welles didn't follow these societal rules. He didn't care. When Orson Welles began spending time with Lena Horne, columnist Hedda Hopper, who was in everyone's business, strongly advised him to toss her aside and only date white women. If he cared one bit about his career, he would take her advice. His reply to her, "Hedda, you can go boil your head." I've never heard that one before. Lena also dated heavyweight champ Joe Louis. Actually, they had a love affair that spanned several years in an on-again, off-again cycle. A big part of the reason it couldn't stay on all the time was that Joe was married, and he had other girlfriends on the side besides Lena. He was a busy, busy guy. Well, the relationship with Joe and Lena came to an end when he hit her across the face and began choking her when she fell to the ground. "I'd never known such a feeling," Joe later said. "What the hell made me do something like that? I'm not that kind of person. Passion can mess you up." I want to point out that although Joe Louis himself spoke of this incident, Lena held strong through her entire life that he was a kind and gentle man and would never physically hurt a woman. She was one loyal woman. Another one of Lena's romantic partners was Artie Shaw. I'm sure he was never marriage material. If she didn't like being married to Louis Jones, she wouldn't last long being married to Artie Shaw and his unrealistic expectations of a dutiful wife. They had fun for a little while, though. It sounds like he was maybe deep and interesting to be around during the dating period, but once he got his claws in you through marriage, everything changed. Which he did 8 times. The one man Lena wanted just wasn't available to her. Her best friend, Billy Strayhorn. She said, quote, He was just everything I wanted in a man, except he wasn't interested in me sexually. If I could have had him, I would have taken him. We were in love anyway. He was the only man I really loved." End quote. Billy felt the same way and said if he wasn't gay, he would have married Lena in a heartbeat. Then came Lenny Hayton, the musical director at MGM I mentioned earlier. He was described as cool, hip, charming, and witty. Lena had known Lenny for a while, both professionally and socially from parties they both attended. They traveled in the same music-centered social circles. But then, in late 1943, a romance began to blossom between the two. Lena said it didn't really begin as love, from her perspective at least. She admits to selfishly wanting to be with him because he could get her places she never could on her own or with a different kind of man. Because Lenny was white. When Louis B. Mayer learned of the relationship between his white musical director and his black contracted player, he tried to put an immediate stop to it. He didn't want the bad publicity this would bring to affect his prized land of make-believe. But they continued on, just really low-key. During World War II, Lena joined the efforts of other prominent black actors like Hattie McDaniel and Louise Beavers in showing support to the black members of military who were enlisted in the war. Segregation and poor treatment were still present for these men, whether they were fighting for their country or not. One place that was not segregated was the Hollywood Canteen, a place built to entertain and support the troops. Lena Horne became highly involved in the Hollywood Canteen and entertained there very often. She even left her own Christmas party when a representative from the canteen called her to save the day when the other celebrities scheduled to perform that night backed out. So Lena left her own party, made the night of many brave soldiers, and made it back to her party just after midnight like it was no big deal. I assume most anyone else would have said no. During the war years, Lena was also becoming involved in Hollywood politics. Thanks to her long talks with her friend Paul Robeson back in her New York days, she had developed a great passion for equality and unity for her fellow black actors in Hollywood, just as the NAACP had wanted for her. A few years down the road, in the fall of 1947, Lena and Lenny set sail for Europe. It was Lena's first time traveling abroad, and her schedule would be full of singing engagements all over London, Paris, Brussels, and more. The Europeans loved her. Taking a little break from wowing European audiences, Lena and Lenny Hayton got married on December 14th, 1947, in the City of Love, Paris. This marriage would remain secret from the public for 3 long years. Simply because it was a union between a black woman and a white man. And when it did become public knowledge, much of the public was not happy for them. There was outrage among certain white communities, even black communities, and even Lena's own family. Most of Lena's family didn't speak to her for 3 years after she married a white man. Lena still had full custody of her daughter Gail when she married Lenny, but her ex-husband Louis still remained their son's primary caregiver. Gail was the only black student at her school, and the school refused to step in and control the racism directed at Gail from the white students because they didn't feel it was necessary to put in all that trouble for just one affected child. Eventually, Lena realized LA was not a healthy place for her daughter to grow up, so she sent her back to New York to live with friends. Then came the Blacklist of 1950, the published list of 151 individuals in Hollywood who were suspected of being communist or communist sympathizers. Movie and television studios, radio, theater, and nightclubs would not touch anyone on that list for their own good. Lena Horne's name was on that list. Her name was on that list because certain civil rights and liberal committees she had been involved with were suddenly seen as potential communist-fronted committees. Another hurdle in 1950 was the publication of the book Lena Horne in Person, written by Helen Arstein and Carlton Moss. Carlton Moss had been a friend of Lena's, such a good friend that she trusted him with some of her most cherished inner thoughts and the most private parts of her life. Like her secret marriage to Lenny Hayton, for instance, and her political views, and her anger about racism, and her feelings about her family, and her great admiration for Paul Robeson, who in 1950 was a very controversial figure. The betrayals that were laid out in the words of that book could do so much damage to Lena's career. Her friend had taken their private talks and published them for the whole world to read. Although these two blows, the blacklist and the book, could have ended Lena Horne's career in an instant, her cabaret career was seemingly unaffected. She was lucky. But her manager knew that with the great changes happening in the entertainment world, Lena would have to transition into America's new obsession, television. Like so many other performers, she wasn't really interested. But she obliged and appeared in some TV variety shows. When she was booked to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show, the Journal-American tried to block her from appearing, both based on race and her being on the communist blacklist. But CBS, sponsor Ford Motor Company, and Ed Sullivan himself fought for her, and Lena appeared on the show. Following the incident, Ed Sullivan advised Lena to make a public anti-communist statement, which she did, and he delivered for her on his show. She was also advised to take a step that really broke her heart. She had to cut ties with her dear friend Paul Robeson, someone she respected so much and felt so aligned with. But his support of Russia during this time of the Red Scare could be too damaging to her image. The 1950s were challenging for Lena Horne, but she made it through. In the end, she maintained her cabaret goddess image. A lot of change came on the entertainment landscape in the late 50s and 1960s. Lena continued to fill nightclub seats, and she began to see some of the clubs she'd been singing at for years slowly become integrated. In 1957, Broadway came calling. Lena was ecstatic to take on this challenge. The production was called Jamaica, and it ran for 558 performances over a 2-year run. Lena Horne was very well received. She just had so much life and animation whenever she performed. Lena was still on top in the 1960s. She was performing on the road and did several engagements at the Sands in Las Vegas. Speaking of, she did not like Frank Sinatra. She turned out albums. Things were great. But her marriage to Lenny was not so great. It had been good. They may not have started as a great passionate love, but they had settled into a happy and comfortable life together. They were a good pair. But conflicts arose during the late 1950s and early 1960s. And the conflict stemmed from the terrifying and dangerous racism that was boiling its way through the nation. Rosa Parks, the Little Rock Nine, Emmett Till, other horrendous lynchings, the violence all over the country against Black Americans. The explosion of racial turmoil during the height of the civil rights movement was just too much to bear. You can imagine how difficult it must have been to be an interracial couple during this time. Not just difficult, but downright dangerous. Lena and Lenny separated in the early 1960s, but remained legally married. Shortly before their separation, in early 1960, while Lena and Lenny were out to dinner, a white diner openly called Lena the N-word. She sternly yet graciously asked him to please stop using that language. The man continued to insult her and her race. She asked him to stop again, and he continued. Lena was pissed. I should mention, Lenny had been away from the table using the phone while this incident was occurring. "This is America," Lena said as she stood at her table and addressed the racist diner. "You cannot insult people like that." Her anger boiled over. Decades of anger, it all came out. She began throwing dishes, ashtrays, anything within reach at the man who continued to insult her. The police were called, and restaurant management refused to kick the racist man out for his behavior that led to this incident. Both Lena and the man were permitted to stay, although he was moved to a different table with his party, and Lena and Lenny ultimately left. I mean, dinner was ruined. To further infuriate Lena, the maitre d' reported to the police and press that the attacked man, quote, took it very gentlemanly. Because gentlemen are always yelling racial slurs at people innocently going about their business, right? This was all over the papers the next day, and of course Lena Horne was portrayed as the one to blame for the incident. That story pretty much sums up the social environment Lena Horne and her fellow Black Americans were forced to live in during 1960s America. So she got heavily involved in the civil rights movement. She did performances on behalf of the NAACP, she joined the National Council for Negro Women, and she and her best friend, Billy Strayhorn, attended civil rights rallies. She attended the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. She watched with over 250,000 people as Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. A few months later, on November 20th, 1963, Lena Horne visited the White House and met with President John F. Kennedy to discuss fundraising plans. Lena and her fellow Black Americans saw so much hope and promise in John F. Kennedy and his great support of American civil rights. 2 days after Lena Horne met with the president, he was assassinated. Kennedy's assassination was followed by other key civil rights-based assassinations that Black Americans terrifyingly watched unfold. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, not to mention the endless lynchings that were occurring all over. Lena Horne's children were all grown up by the mid-1960s, and she became a grandmother during this decade. Lena's daughter Gail was her closest friend, and she loved and doted on her grandchildren. Lena continued to entertain audiences throughout the decade of the 1970s. But the year that kicked off that decade was filled with tragedy and heartbreak. Lena's father died in April of 1970, and then just 5 months later, in September of that year, Lena received an even greater blow. Her son, Teddy, had died. He was only 30 years old when he died of renal failure, leaving behind a wife and 4 children. Lena would never have the chance to reconnect on an intimate level with the son she was never allowed to raise. She would never know him as a person, as a husband, as a father. His death haunted her for the rest of her life. The universe wasn't done with Lena yet, though. Mourning the deaths of both her beloved father and her child, her estranged husband Lenny died in April of 1971. Within a 1-year period, Lena Horne lost 3 of the most important people in her life. Lena rode out the 70s doing a lot of television engagements. She did some film work, some more theater work on Broadway, and she also hit the road singing with Tony Bennett. Lena moved with the times and was singing new, fresh material, including songs like Something by the Beatles. She was as beloved as ever. Lena Horne announced her retirement in 1980. In a piece for Ebony magazine, Lena said of maturity and aging, quote, "I've deliberately matured myself so that when I've reached the age I am now, I don't care. And I'm happy with my age. I've been lucky because no matter how the years come, my head tries to keep up with what's happening. I'm not going to let myself become a dumb old broad or a glamorous old bat." End quote. I love that. Well, Lena didn't retire. Instead, she developed a one-woman show about her life. Now in her mid-60s, Lena set out on Lena Horne, the Lady and Her Music, which opened on May 12, 1981. She brought her audiences through the story of her life, mostly her professional life, through song and speech. It was an intimate journey, and everyone was mesmerized. After opening night, headlines and reviews in the following morning's papers were ecstatic in their responses. Things like, "Lena, spell her Dynamite," and "Lena Horne is the season's best musical," and "Lena takes Broadway by storm," and my favorite, "The sexiest woman on Broadway is a 63-year-old grandmother." Everyone wanted to see Lena's show. Notable stars who turned out to see her were Jackie O, Elizabeth Taylor, Diana Ross, Sammy Davis Jr., Cab Calloway, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Aretha Franklin, Debbie Reynolds, Katharine Hepburn, Hedy Lamarr, Michael Jackson, and First Lady Nancy Reagan. Just stop for a minute and analyze that list of people. Old Hollywood and New Hollywood, jazz and soul and modern pop music, former and current First Ladies of the United States. Everyone wanted to see Lena. Everyone. She toured all over the world with her show, and she earned a Tony Award for it. In 1983, Lena Horne was presented with the Spingarn Medal by the NAACP for her outstanding work in civil and human rights. In 1984, she was the recipient of the esteemed Kennedy Center Honors. And in 1989, she received a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award, plus a ton of other awards that I did not mention. She continued to turn out music albums and perform all over the world. You could not stop this woman. She released her last album in 2006 at the age of 89 years old. Even the most goddess-like figures are mere mortals, though. The amazing Lena Horne died of heart failure on May 9th, 2010, at the age of 92. She was surrounded by family and love. The day Lena Horne died was Mother's Day. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. MGM shot her in many of their films in a way in which her scenes could be easily cut. They didn't want to upset the racist people of the South by making them watch a beautiful black woman on their movie screens. Bullet point number 2. Lena's daughter Gail became a journalist. She wrote for Vogue and the New York Times and authored 2 books. Bullet point number 3. Lena Horne lived her final years at the Apthorpe Apartments in Manhattan's Upper West Side. The Apthorpe has also been the home of Cyndi Lauper, Rosie O'Donnell, Al Pacino, and Conan O'Brien. Bullet point number 4. Lena Horne received an honorary doctorate from Howard University in 1980. In conclusion, Lena Horne became the trailblazer for equality and civil rights that she had never set out to be. She never even wanted to be a performer, yet she became one of the most beloved performers of the 20th century. Her life was dictated for her, first by her mother, then by the NAACP, then by the film studio. She was chosen to be the face of racial equality and advancement in the entertainment industry, and she accepted that position and did it well. I urge you to watch Lena's interview with American Masters and to watch performances of her available online. I'll share some links. There is something just so dynamic about her energy. You can't take your eyes off of her. She brought so much emotion to her songs. She was just so beautiful, inside and out. Thank you, Lena Horne, for sacrificing your own dreams and aspirations for the sake of millions of others. And thank you all for listening. My primary source for this episode was a book titled Lena Horne, Goddess Reclaimed by Donald Bogle. I also used a documentary titled Lena Horne in Her Own Voice from the American Masters series. Also, American Masters Creative Spark by PBS. And, of course, The Wind Beneath My Wings, IMDB.